More than half of Americans now say President Trump has made the economy worse. How did we get here? The latest CNN poll reveals a dramatic shift in public opinion on President Trump's economic policies, with 56% of Americans now believing that the U.S. economy is in worse shape since he took office. What changed? Just a few years ago, Trump's administration was touting job growth, stock market booms, and tax cuts as evidence of a thriving economy. But as inflation surges, wages remain stagnant, and gas prices rise, a growing number of Americans are questioning whether Trump's promises have truly delivered on their economic expectations. In this special report, we will take a deep dive into the latest poll findings, look at the key economic indicators driving this shift, and explore what it means for Trump's 2026 re-election bid. As rising prices and job insecurity continue to affect everyday Americans, the question is, can Trump recover from this economic setback before the next election, or has his economic legacy been irreparably damaged? While President Trump continues to argue that his economic policies have been a success, more and more Americans are feeling the effects of an economy that's not working for them. From rising inflation to wages stagnation, the disconnect between Trump's rhetoric and the reality on the ground is more apparent than ever. Trump continues to tout his success, claiming credit for a booming economy. But the latest numbers paint a very different picture. For many, the cost of living has become a daily struggle. And according to the CNN poll, a growing majority of Americans now say that Trump's economic policies have made things worse. Tonight, we'll break down the findings of the CNN poll, explain the economic trends that have led to this shift in public opinion, and look ahead to the implications for the 2026 election. Stay with us as we analyze the economic challenges facing America, and whether President Trump can still turn things around. The latest CNN poll reveals a stunning shift in the American public's opinion about President Trump's economic policies. As of this week, 56% of Americans now believe the economy has worsened since Trump took office, a stark contrast from the early years of his presidency when the economy was often touted as booming. Let's break down the numbers. According to the poll, 56% of Americans believe that the economy has worsened under Trump. 42% feel it has improved, a sharp decrease from earlier polls where Trump's approval on economic issues was higher. Among independent voters, 58% now say the economy is in worse shape, up from just 45% a year ago. This growing dissatisfaction with Trump's economic performance is spanning party lines, with increasing frustration from independent voters and even some Republican-leaning individuals. For much of Trump's presidency, a majority of Americans believed that his economic policies, such as tax cuts for corporations, deregulation, and trade deals like USMCA, were having a positive impact on the economy. But as inflation rises and job security remains uncertain, Americans are now reassessing the true impact of these policies. As the polling numbers reflect a growing dissatisfaction, many voters are becoming increasingly vocal about the disconnect between Trump's claims of a thriving economy and the realities of their own lives. Political analysts have pointed out that Trump's economic message is not resonating as it once did. While his early economic narrative focused on job growth and stock market gains, more recent trends, such as inflation, rising consumer prices, and wage stagnation, are now shaping public opinion. Interview economist: what we're seeing here is a situation where the economic indicators Trump has focused on, like job creation, are overshadowed by rising inflation and increased costs of living. The average American is more focused on their daily struggles, like higher grocery bills and gas prices, than on stock market numbers or tax cuts. Key economic factors driving dissatisfaction. Rising inflation. At its highest point in 40 years, inflation has significantly impacted consumer prices. Stagnant wages. While unemployment rates have fallen, wages have remained flat, making it harder for workers to keep up with the increasing cost of living. Gas prices. A significant rise in gas prices has become a daily burden for many Americans, particularly in middle-class and working-class families. The growing gap between economic optimism touted by Trump and the economic reality felt by everyday Americans is a central issue in this poll, which will likely shape public opinion heading into the 2026 elections. Democrats have seized on this dissatisfaction, pointing to rising prices and stagnant wages as evidence that Trump's economic policies have failed to benefit most Americans. Meanwhile, some Republicans are also growing more vocal in their criticism, questioning whether Trump's corporate tax cuts and trade wars have truly helped the working class. In the coming months, this poll will likely set the stage for a re-evaluation of Trump's economic policies as he gears up for the 2026 election. The growing dissatisfaction may lead to more public discussions about economic reform and the role of government in addressing inequality. So, with 56% of Americans now saying the economy is worse, the question remains, what does this mean for President Trump? How will these numbers affect his support in swing states in 2026, and can he regain trust from voters who feel left behind by his economic policies? While public opinion is clearly shifting against President Trump on the economy, the question remains, why? What specific economic factors are driving this growing dissatisfaction among the American public? To understand this, we need to look at the key economic indicators that have been at the heart of this debate. Rising inflation. One of the most significant factors contributing to the public's shift in perception is the dramatic rise in inflation. In the past year, inflation has reached its highest level in 40 years, with consumer prices rising across almost every sector. Food, fuel, and housing have all seen dramatic increases. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, food prices alone have increased by 10% in the last year, while gas prices are up more than 25% since Trump's first term. For everyday Americans, these rising prices are a daily strain. More than just numbers on a page, inflation has made it harder for families to make ends meet. Wages, while increasing slightly in some sectors, have not kept pace with the surge in prices. This disconnect between wage growth and cost of living has led many Americans to question whether the economic boom Trump promised is actually reaching them. Wage stagnation and underemployment. While the unemployment rate has decreased during Trump's presidency, this statistic alone doesn't tell the whole story. Underemployment, where workers are in jobs that don't fully utilize their skills or offer enough hours to make a living, has remained a major issue. In fact, many workers are still working multiple jobs or are underemployed, unable to secure stable, full-time work with benefits. This is especially true for people in blue-collar industries, service sectors, and gig economy jobs. While the official unemployment rate may be low, many Americans are not seeing the full benefits of these numbers in their paychecks. In a key battleground state like Michigan, workers in the manufacturing sector have voiced frustration about job security, low wages, and the outsourcing of jobs overseas. In fact, many voters in the Rust Belt who once supported Trump are now questioning whether his trade wars and economic promises have truly benefited them. Rising gas prices and cost of living. Another major factor that is making Americans feel the pinch is rising gas prices. Since the beginning of Trump's second term, the price of gas has soared. While global supply chain issues and geopolitical tensions have contributed, many Americans are placing the blame squarely on the Trump administration's trade policies, particularly his trade war with China, which led to a disruption in global supply chains and contributed to higher import costs. For families who rely on driving to work, commuting, or even just running errands, these higher gas prices have cut deeply into household budgets. And for many Americans, this invisible tax has been the tipping point in their growing frustration with the economy. Job growth versus job quality. Trump has repeatedly pointed to job growth as one of his administration's successes, but critics argue that job quality matters just as much. In fact, many of the new jobs created under Trump have been in low-wage sectors, part-time or gig economy roles, which lack the benefits, security, and opportunities for advancement that many workers once enjoyed. Real wages, the amount of money workers can buy with their income, have remained stagnant, making it harder for Americans to keep up with the rising cost of living. For families struggling with high rent, student loan debt, and healthcare costs, the increased job numbers simply aren't enough. The wealth gap. Perhaps the most damaging aspect of Trump's economic policies, particularly the tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy, has been the widening wealth gap between the richest Americans and everyone else. While the stock market boomed during his time in office, the benefits were largely concentrated at the top. According to a study by the Economic Policy Institute, the top 1% of American households saw their income increase by over 20% during Trump's tenure, while wages for the bottom 90% of earners saw only modest gains. The economic recovery, while real, has disproportionately benefited corporations and high-income individuals, leaving working-class families behind. While Trump's tax cuts were hailed by the wealthy as a victory, middle-class and low-income Americans have felt little to no benefit. For many, it's becoming clear that the American dream, once defined by hard work and upward mobility, is becoming increasingly out of reach for the vast majority of people. As these economic pressures mount, Americans are starting to feel that the economic promises made by President Trump have fallen flat for much of the country. The rise in cost of living coupled with stagnant wages has led many to reconsider their support for Trump's economic agenda. And with the 2026 elections on the horizon, this growing frustration may become a decisive factor in how voters choose to move forward. In the face of growing dissatisfaction with his economic policies, President Trump has continued to defend his record, doubling down on his administration's tax cuts, deregulation, and trade wars as key components of his economic success. But how much longer can he hold on to the narrative of an economy in recovery, especially when the numbers tell a different story? Trump's defense of his economic policies has been largely based on his claims of job growth and stock market performance. He has repeatedly pointed to the record-low unemployment rates and the rise in corporate profits as evidence that his administration has revitalized the American economy. But despite his assertions, the reality of rising inflation, wage stagnation, and a growing wealth gap has left many questioning the true impact of his policies. In rallies across the country, Trump continues to emphasize the success of his tax cuts, which he argues have boosted business growth and job creation. He also points to the U.S. Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, his trade deal with Mexico and Canada, as evidence that his America First trade policies are benefiting American workers. Yet, critics argue that these policies have primarily benefited large corporations and the wealthiest Americans, with minimal trickle-down effects for the working class. Income inequality has continued to widen during Trump's time in office, and many of the jobs created under his watch have been low-wage or part-time positions that don't provide the benefits and security that many workers expect. Trump's economic policies have certainly benefited corporations and the stock market. But when it comes to the average American worker, the benefits have been much less clear. Wages have stagnated, and job quality has not improved significantly for most people. The reality is that corporate profits have soared, while most workers are left behind. Trump's tax cuts, which disproportionately benefited corporations and high-income earners, have been another point of contention. While these cuts were hailed as a way to stimulate the economy, many Americans feel they have seen little benefit. In fact, the tax cuts were followed by rising deficits and increased national debt, as the cuts didn't produce the expected growth in government revenue. The corporate tax cuts, which lowered the tax rate for businesses from 35% to 21%, were supposed to encourage companies to bring jobs back to the U.S. and reinvest in American workers. But instead, many companies used the savings to buy back stock and increase dividends for shareholders, rather than investing in the American workforce. Trump's trade war with China has also been a central part of his economic strategy. While he argues that the tariffs imposed on Chinese goods have forced China to agree to fairer trade practices, critics point out that these tariffs have raised prices for American consumers and hurt American businesses. In particular, farmers and manufacturers have been hit hard by China's retaliatory tariffs, which have made it more difficult for them to export goods. While Trump claims his tariffs are a way to level the playing field, many Americans are now questioning whether the benefits outweigh the costs. Farmers, once a key part of Trump's base, are increasingly worried about the long-term damage to their industries. Trump's trade policies have undoubtedly impacted certain industries, but for many voters, the immediate effects of rising costs and wages stagnation have overshadowed any potential benefits from his protectionist approach. Even as Trump defends his policies, it's clear that the American public is feeling the economic strain, and Trump's approval ratings on the economy continue to fall as a result. Despite the criticism, Trump remains steadfast in his belief that his policies have strengthened the economy. His rhetoric continues to focus on job creation and tax relief as the driving forces behind economic recovery. But with public opinion increasingly turning against him, Trump will have to confront the hard truth that his economic narrative is no longer resonating with a growing number of Americans. As we head into the 2026 election, Trump faces the challenge of convincing the public that his economic vision has succeeded, even as many Americans are feeling the financial pressure. With rising prices, stagnant wages, and increasing economic inequality, it remains to be seen whether his defense of his economic record will be enough to win back the support of voters in critical swing states. The results of the CNN poll have sent shockwaves through President Trump's political landscape. As more Americans express their dissatisfaction with the economy, the implications for Trump's re-election bid in 2026 are becoming clearer. A growing number of voters are questioning whether Trump's economic promises have been fulfilled and whether he is the right leader to guide the country into the next chapter. Trump's approval rating on the economy has dropped significantly since the peak of his presidency. In key swing states, where elections are often decided by just a few points, the growing economic discontent has created a vulnerable position for Trump, especially among independent voters who once supported him for his economic policies. According to the latest polling, a majority of independent voters now disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy, with many feeling the pinch of rising inflation, stagnant wages, and job insecurity. Once considered a cornerstone of his appeal, Trump's economic message is now a liability in many battleground states. Swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which were crucial to Trump's victory in 2016, are now showing significant dissatisfaction with his economic record. While Trump once captured the support of working-class voters in these states with his promise to bring back jobs and cut taxes, many of those voters are now reconsidering their support due to the economic strain they're experiencing. This shift in public opinion presents a real challenge for Trump as he prepares for the 2026 election. With voters in critical swing states questioning his handling of the economy, Trump will need to find a way to reclaim their support. The economic frustration is crossing party lines, with many disillusioned Republican voters now seriously questioning whether Trump can deliver on his promises for the working class. How will Trump address these economic concerns? Will he continue to double down on his current economic policies, or will he pivot to a new strategy in order to win back the trust of voters who are feeling left behind? Democrats are seizing on Trump's economic vulnerabilities, sharpening their focus on income inequality, healthcare, and climate action, all issues that resonate with voters who feel left behind by Trump's economic agenda. Candidates from the Democratic Party are likely to highlight the gap between corporate profits and working-class struggles in their campaigns, positioning themselves as the solution to the economic frustration Trump has failed to address. Joe Biden, in particular, has been vocal about Trump's failures in handling the economy. His campaign has already begun to highlight the disconnect between Trump's rhetoric and the reality of everyday Americans. With Republican governors and mayors in swing states also starting to push back against Trump's economic agenda, the battle for the 2026 presidency is set to be fiercely contested. If Trump is to remain competitive in 2026, he will need to address the growing concerns over his economic record. He may need to pivot on issues like trade and tax policy, especially if public sentiment continues to shift against him. Voters who once supported his tax cuts and trade policies are now rethinking whether the benefits truly trickle down to them, and whether these policies are worth the rising costs they're facing. Key battleground states will be crucial to Trump's re-election efforts. In states like Pennsylvania, where the working-class vote was pivotal to his victory in 2016, his economic policies will be scrutinized more closely than ever before. The Rust Belt, once a stronghold of Trump's support, now faces increasing economic uncertainty, with voters in these states growing more dissatisfied with the current economic outlook. As we move closer to the 2026 election, the results of this latest CNN poll are beginning to take shape as a critical factor in the political landscape. With a growing majority of Americans now believing that President Trump has made the economy worse, the question becomes, how will this impact his chances for re-election? The stakes couldn't be higher. Trump, who once had a strong economic message that resonated with voters, now finds himself in a vulnerable position as public frustration with the economy grows. The polling data points to a growing disconnect between Trump's economic promises and the reality that many Americans are facing. The inflation that has hit everyday Americans hard, coupled with stagnant wages, has become a significant issue for voters across the political spectrum. Swing states such as Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, which were crucial to Trump's victory in 2016, are now showing significant signs of economic dissatisfaction. The states that helped elect Trump in 2016 are now seeing more voters question whether his policies have truly improved their economic situation. The question of whether Trump can retain his base in these key states is now a pressing issue, especially as independent voters and even some Republican-leaning voters are growing disillusioned with his handling of the economy. In these crucial battleground states, Trump will need to win back the trust of voters who once saw him as the answer to their economic struggles. But can he do that in time for the 2026 election? The fact remains that economic issues are front and center in this election cycle, and Trump's economic record is now under intense scrutiny. The political fallout from the latest poll could have a significant impact on Trump's campaign strategies moving forward. If the trend of economic dissatisfaction continues, Trump may need to pivot to a new economic message or policy to regain voter trust. The growing gap between his promises and the reality that many Americans are experiencing will need to be addressed if he wants to maintain the support of his base and key swing state voters. Democrats, seeing this opportunity, are already making the case that Trump's economic agenda has disproportionately benefited the wealthy while leaving working-class Americans behind. They are positioning themselves as the solution to the economic frustration many voters feel, with policies aimed at income inequality, healthcare, and raising the minimum wage. This could further energize progressive voters, who have long been critical of Trump's economic policies. If Trump wants to hold on to key swing states in 2026, he will need to convince voters that his economic policies have been beneficial for the middle class. However, the cost of living, job insecurity, and inflation are likely to remain major talking points for his opponents. Democrats will continue to emphasize these issues, creating a challenging environment for Trump to defend his economic legacy. Can Trump rebound from this growing dissatisfaction with his economic record? His path to re-election in 2026 may depend on how effectively he can address these concerns, whether by altering his policies or pivoting his messaging to convince voters that the economy is improving or that he has the solutions to fix it. However, if the economic discontent continues to grow, and voters remain unconvinced by Trump's narrative of success, the 2026 election could see a shift in power, one that challenges Trump's ability to secure a second term. With the economy now front and center in voters' minds, Trump will need to adapt quickly. The future of his presidency, and his re-election bid, could very well depend on whether he can deliver tangible results that address the economic struggles of the American people. The results of the CNN poll are just the beginning. How Trump responds to this economic backlash will shape the direction of his campaign, and the 2026 election. As Americans prepare for the 2026 election, the future of the economy remains uncertain. For Trump, the next steps are critical. Will he continue to push forward with the economic policies that helped define his first term? Or will he pivot to address the growing economic dissatisfaction that could cost him re-election? Stay tuned as the story unfolds. We'll continue to bring you the latest developments on the economy, the 2026 election, and the ongoing battle for the future of America.